Welcome to another episode of the podcast. Dr. Thomas Hemingway here. Make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss out.
We have a very special guest here today. I'm so pumped, so thrilled to have this interview because this is somebody who's really been setting the path for not only just crushing it with sort of the ketogenic lifestyle, but she is a master at just making things simple. And in my mind, that's one of the most important things about being able to not only be knowledgeable, but to disseminate this information so clearly, so concisely, and just making it real for all of us. And Vanessa Spina is here with us today. She is a sports nutrition specialist. She's a best-selling author of the book Keto Essentials, which I love because not only does she talk about keto, but she gives recipes. Like, she makes it easy for us to follow. And so we're going to get into such a fabulous discussion about her, where she came from, and just try to extract some of these pearls that have really helped her just crush life, because she is a product of the product. She is living it. She is thriving. So can't wait to hear from her. Vanessa, how are you?
I am doing amazing. How are you doing?
Oh my gosh, it's a beautiful day in the mountains today. I'm just happy to be here every day. You know, it's a great day for a great day. That's how I look at the world. It's
I love
it makes
that.
me smile.
Yeah, you have amazing light right now coming
The sun
on
just
you
came
there.
up. I
It
know.
looks
It's like,
beautiful.
oh my gosh, it's going to be too dark because it's a little earlier than I usually start. And I'm so grateful to be able to get you. And I think daytime for you too as well, right?
Yeah, it's
End of the day.
just 4 p.m. here, so I really appreciate you doing this early. But yeah, there's a big time difference between
Yeah.
Prague and Utah, so I appreciate it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, Vanessa is such a powerhouse. And I just want her to start with her story a little bit, how she came to where she is, because certainly she didn't start as a keto girl. And I know it was quite a journey. And I'd love to have you just share a little bit about how this all came about and how you got to where you are with keto and whatnot.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. I find that over the years, I've sort of evolved my approach to keto a little bit, which we can definitely talk about. But when I first started, I was having a lot of health issues that were kind of unresolved. I saw different doctors and naturopaths, and I always had this sort of feeling in my body of, I would wake up every day and something would hurt or something would be, sore or just not functioning, optimally. And I also didn't feel very fit in my body, even though I was doing everything that I thought, was supposed to be healthy. I was doing a plant-based diet. As we were just talking about, I was, vegetarian for 17 years. I was vegan for a point, raw fruitarian, doing what I thought was the healthiest diet and just exercising nonstop. And yet I still didn't feel fit, or really healthy in my body. And I finally had actually a body scan done, and the scan tech was shocked when he saw that I was almost 40% body fat. And I just carried my weight pretty well. I'm a, taller person. And I guess just the way my body is, I was one of those people that you can't really tell from the outside. There's like different terms for it, like skinny fat or, thin on the outside, fat on the inside. And I realized, well, this is what's going on. Doctors always told me that my weight, was classified under BMI as, fine, but I didn't feel good in my body. And I realized that I was in the obese category, which I had always had like a sneaking suspicion or sort of felt. And I also started, figuring out some things with regards to gluten and starting to look into, doing sugar-free. And I found my way to keto and intermittent fasting, just finding different articles and resources. And I started seeing really amazing improvements in my health. One of the things that really initially drew me to keto was the fact that you can get some biofeedback, because keto is the only diet where there is an independent biomarker that you can actually use to see how you're doing. So the fact that you could test your blood, see what your blood glucose and your ketones are actually doing, ketones being that, objective biomarker, was really thrilling to me, because a lot of times with diet and exercise, it kind of feels like you are, throwing different things against a wall and hoping something will stick. But for me with this, I was like, well, this is scientific method. Like, this is something testable. This is something that I can actually see if I'm following it properly or not. And so I really got excited about keto and started really diving deep into the science of it. I eventually, started sharing more and more information, sharing recipes, and people started asking me to do meal plans. And then I eventually wrote the book Keto Essentials. And in that time, I really learned so much about the science of keto, and especially, understanding a little bit more about, the sort of bioenergetics and the way that our bodies actually work in terms of fat loss, and understanding that it's not just, this energy in, energy out sort of equation, but there is this hormonal aspect to weight loss. And I started learning about, this endocrine theory, and not, some people, when they kind of learn the other one, they just throw the other one out. But for me, I was just combining the two. So, okay, now we understand, the bioenergetics part. Let's understand the endocrine, the hormonal part, and combine those together. And that really helped me to understand fat loss in a new way. And then I went back to school a few years ago to study biochemistry, did a 2-year biomedical science program. And since then, I've been using my podcast, basically the Optimal Protein Podcast, which was formerly called Fast Keto, to help share the science behind fat loss and hormones and intermittent fasting and ketones and all of these different, strategies and protocols and approaches that we can use to really optimize our health. And, just sharing my journey along with it, the progress that I've made. And I was able to go from that, 38% body fat to where I am now, which is around 21%. I haven't had a really recent one because I just had a baby, but I've gotten back to my sort of pre-baby shape, and, getting down to around 21%, which is in the athletic category, and wanting people to understand there's so much more than just BMI. We want to understand what our body composition is, what our body is composed of, and how much our metabolic health actually has to do with our overall health is just a really important message that I'm trying to share and get out there more and more on the podcast and any, programs and work that I do.
Wow. I mean, that that right there, you're amazing. Anybody who goes back to school to do biochemistry, like, take it from me as a physician, I got a minor in biochemistry in college, and in the university there, it was like everybody hated those classes. It was like torture. And, I'm kind of like you. I kind of liked it. It was kind of fun, and learning the nuance of how this stuff actually occurs in the body. For me, it was empowering,
Yes.
and the fact that you went back and got this degree, I just think that is incredible. And let's just
Thank you.
for the listeners and viewers, let's just kind of break it down real simply. Like, tell us what is, or what is ketosis, and what does that entail in a simple way in the body? Yes, we can measure the ketones, like you said, which is such a cool feedback, which is basically immediate feedback to how we're doing. But tell us a little bit, what is ketosis anyway? Why should we care? And just kind of break it down for us a little bit.
I love this question. It's such a great question. So, when we think about how our bodies burn fuel, we think we'll eat food and then, we burn that energy as fuel. And you can go into deeper levels on that, the more you get into chemistry, obviously. But, I think a really simple way to look at it is this understanding of, humans are kind of dual fuel. We can burn either glucose or we can burn fat or lipids. And for a long time, I was doing a high carb diet, typical vegetarian or plant-based person. And I didn't know that you could actually make your body more of a fat burner, more fat adapted. And when we go into ketosis, that's essentially what's happening, is we're becoming more metabolically flexible and activating our full metabolic flexibility, because when we just burn glucose, you're kind of trapped in only having the ability to burn, glucose or carbs for fuel if you're not metabolically flexible, if you're inflexible. If you're metabolically flexible, then you can burn sugar or fats. You can switch back and forth between those two fuels. And we are, adapted to burning those two fuels, but we have mitochondria in our cells, which are, the little, powerhouses of energy factories in our cells. And they make, let's say for 1 mole of glucose, only about 37 ATP, but from 1 mole of say fats or lipids, they can make about 140 ATP, which is ATP is an energy currency that we use in our bodies for, all these different, biochemical processes that we do. And, there's glycolysis, which I don't want to get too in the weeds with the biochem here. So I'll pull back a little bit from that. But essentially, we want our bodies to be able to burn both fuels. And when we start pulling back on how many carbohydrates we consume, our bodies then start to be able to tap into our stored body fat more readily. And we start to train our bodies to be able to be so flexible that we can burn fat that we eat, fat on our bodies, where in the past you're kind of stuck just in burning the glucose that you eat. And so it's a much more fuel efficient way of, consuming energy, creating energy, but also at the same time, you cause a lot less oxidative damage to your mitochondria. And that's really what keeps us young and enables us to live longer, is having really, really healthy mitochondria. So this is something that really interests me about being fat adapted and being metabolically flexible. But then you have this whole aspect of ketones. So ketones are these incredible, magical molecules that do so much. We're still learning so much about what they do, but our body can basically start generating ketones in the liver from our stored fat, or, also from fat that you eat. But mostly when you make ketones, you make, there's a few different forms of the ketones, but you start making them in the liver, and your body makes acetoacetate and makes beta hydroxybutyrate. These are the two forms of ketones, and the liver can't actually use them. So it goes out into our circulation, and different tissues can use those ketones. So we start to be able to measure ketones, as we were talking about, in the blood. Some people measure it in their urine. Some people measure it in the breath. I created a device called the Tone device that measures it in the breath. So you can also measure it in the breath really easily without having to prick your finger. But these ketones, when they are present, it's an indicator that your body is really burning a lot of fat, that you are really fat adapted, you're keto adapted. And so you can use it as a, feedback or form of feedback to measure how well you're doing in terms of your fat adaptation. And the ketones do so much for us. They're doing a lot of things that we don't quite understand yet, but what we do understand, things that they're doing, one of the things that we do understand they're doing is they're signaling to our mitochondria to be able to uncouple. And that helps our mitochondria to stay healthy and our mitochondria be able to replicate. And the more mitochondria we have and the healthier the mitochondria are, again, is what is going to keep us, healthy and living for a really long period of time. So, there's a lot of different reasons why people want to do keto. There's all these benefits. You can Google them. You'll see there's so many benefits on the mental clarity, on sustained energy, on mood. And, we also were talking a little bit before the podcast started about different, disease protocols and helping prevent disease and metabolic syndrome. But there's also all these other benefits like weight loss and just overall health and mitochondrial health, I think, are really, really powerful aspects of why someone would want to go to the trouble of learning what keto is, and then, let alone doing it and all of that comes with it.
Yeah, wow, that you really shared a lot there. And I think a couple of things that I'll just pull out that I just love is that, truly our bodies have been designed to do this. We can utilize both the glucose, but we can certainly utilize, and I feel like even better, the fats. And like you said, the liver can pump out the ketones, which are, the way I look at it is it's a much cleaner energy. So when you burn glucose, it's kind of like, if you compare it to a vehicle that's burning, say, diesel, and what do you see behind that vehicle? It's like this heavy, sooty mess that, like, if you were behind it, you can literally feel it on your clothes. Like it's just a dirty combustion process. And that's likened to our bodies when we burn tons of glucose. It's just a dirtier method, and it has lots of byproducts, which are basically inflammation. And you kind of spoke to that, which is the oxidative stress that happens with burning a ton of glucose, which not only harms or injures the mitochondria, but it makes it so our whole bodies tend to be more in an inflammatory state. Whereas if we're powered by fats, healthy fats especially, and producing these ketones, they burn kind of like zero emission kind of thing, like pretty minimal stress, minimal oxidative damage, real clean energy. And it's way more energetically useful to us. Like you mentioned, the 100 some odd ATP versus 30 some odd. And so it's triple to quadruple the amount of energy. And we can just tell, you're glowing there on the camera. I eat similarly, and I feel so energetic all throughout the day. It's like a lot of people complain that their metabolisms, quote unquote, slow down once they hit 30 or whatever. And that's not shown in the data. The literature does not support that. And I've shared this before. What slows down is we slow down and our mitochondria get less healthy. So we're not making as much energy. And this is all under our control. And so thank you for sharing how simply this can really occur, and the inflammation that's the byproduct of all this glucose that we tend to eat. And in most of the world, I mean, the whole developed world is 50 to 60%, carbohydrate based. And I really feel like that's a travesty. What do you shoot for? I know you probably eat a little bit of carbs here and there, but what is there some certain number you shoot for, or what do you feel like that magic number is?
For me, it's the lower or the less, the better in general. That's just because I personally have a history of food addiction and not being able to be much of a moderator. So I personally do best when I have a lot of like self generated boundaries around what I eat. And it, for me, I just I removed carbs from my diet, 6 or 7 years ago. It's something that I have tried to become more open to experimenting with because, as a sports nutrition specialist, I understand the role that carbohydrates have in fueling workouts and performance. And I love working out. I love doing resistance training. And, so I have tried little experiments. Well, I'll do little, mini carb ups. And for me, that's like going to 40 grams of carb. It's like a carb up for me. Because I've kept my carbs low for so long. And, I have noticed sometimes like a little bit of a boost in my workout, but overall, I feel less satisfied and I start to become more preoccupied with food. So it's a very like a small budget that that I have for carbohydrates. I just don't personally do well with them. And the lower I keep that carbohydrate intake, the freer I feel, like the less I think about food. I only think about meals when I'm really hungry and it's time to eat. And for someone who, previously struggled with food, addiction and always feeling starving because I was, really, starving for nutrients when I was doing especially like a, plant-based lifestyle for so long, to not have that consume my thoughts is really helpful. So I keep the carbs very, very low. I've been doing carnivore on and off for the past few years and a high protein version. So I do what's called like a modified ketogenic diet, which is a little bit higher protein intake. So usually the traditional ketogenic diet is about 15% protein and then 80 to 85 around that for traditional ketogenic macros of fat, and then 0 to 5% carb. And with the moderated approach, it's closer to 30% protein. So because I eat more protein, I also have to keep the carbs lower in order to maintain a presence of ketones. And I also combine that with intermittent fasting daily and been doing that for about 7 years now. And I also do my workouts fasted, and those things, along with some other protocols like cold exposure, these things help me to be able to produce ketones and have, some presence of ketones most of the time. But every time I try to experiment with carbs, it just throws me, like my sleep goes off, and I just find myself like wanting, like I'm like eyeing Luca's like dried fruit snacks and stuff. And it's just not something I think about. And then it's like I have a little bit, and then there's like this carb creep, thing that happens, and I just want more and more and more. And I eat for myself, and it just doesn't work well for me.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that, because what I found in, the last decade or so that I've been focusing more on this is it is individualized. There's no one exact number that we should all shoot for. I mean, I think when this movement first started, people were kind of like doing the, flex if you're, you could get the highest number of ketones. It was kind of like this competition, and not everybody did really well in that. Everybody has to adjust it to their body. And you've just shared a perfect example of how you can use mindfulness and listen to your body and what your body needs. Your body knows. Your body's smart.
Yes.
Your body is made to adapt to all kinds of conditions and circumstances, but it does have a sweet spot. And so if we kind of find what that sweet spot is, I think that's when you are just in that zone, where you feel great, you're full of energy. And like you mentioned, the carb thing, I love what you said about how once you kind of start down, when yourself personally reintroduce more carbs, it's kind of like you want to add more and more. They're addictive, yes. And of course, beyond that, there's this whole fact of the gut health portion, the microbiota that lives in your intestinal tract that will tell you to eat more carbs because they survive better, right? When you get your balance out of whack and you have dysbiosis, you're going to be, tending towards having signals from the not so healthy bacteria, literally telling your brain to eat more carbs. And so it's not you being weak. This is just normal physiology. This is simple physiology. And one of the things I wanted you to share about is when you first started, 7 years or whatever it was ago, did you experience a little bit of a keto flu? I know a lot of people do. Personally, I didn't really, but it's variable. Some people have it bad. Did you have that? And what are your thoughts on that?
I had zero keto flu, and I had to really research and talk to other people who had experienced it to understand it, because I knew that I was getting feedback from people that they were experiencing that. And for some reason I didn't. I don't know if it was like because I did it gradually, but I generally recommend that people do reduce their carbs gradually. Like, don't just go from 200-300 grams of carb one day to zero the next. Like that, it won't feel good, and people will probably have some of those flu symptoms. And then, people talk all the time about electrolytes and making sure that you're supplementing with, sodium. I like to, if I ever were to feel off like that, I would just add a little bit, like 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt to my water. But I never had the adaptation, and I'm not sure why some people do. I wonder now that I think about it, if it has something to do with the mitochondria, and, because everyone inherits their mitochondria from their mother, and that gets passed down, from our great grandmother, grandmother down to us. And so I think depending on how your mitochondria might be functioning, that could be a part of it, how many you have, and how well they all take to switching over, the fuels. But yeah, I never really had it. It's good to know that you didn't either, but I know a lot of people experience it when they first make the switch, if they maybe do it too quickly or not very gradually.
Yeah, I think that's probably the key thing to take away is don't go 0 to 60 and literally one day have 200 grams of carbs and the next day less than 50. Like, your body will notice that. But I think what you said really is telling your overall mitochondrial situation, your mitochondrial health will really play into that, how well they can adapt to that change. But definitely doing things gradually, I would say, is really important. And you can probably avoid the keto flu in most cases. And if you do get it, it's not a big deal. You're not going to die from it. It's just, you feel like you're achy, you're a little bit foggy. You just don't feel quite yourself like you do when you're having the flu, right? You feel a little bit down and out. And if you really focus on hydration and making sure you're getting proper electrolytes, you can get through it. But I think just making that transition slowly is really critical. One thing I want to touch on, I hope it's okay, but you mentioned, your son having dried fruit or something, which obviously fruit has carbs, right? I mean, natural carbs. Thankfully, you give him full fruit and not fruit juice. When I was in my early parenting, my pediatrician told my wife and I, hey, now is the time to transition, your son, I had all sons in the beginning, off the, bottle of breast milk and start having other things like juice, like apple juice. Like, we used to buy like the 1-gallon containers of apple juice, which just makes me cringe right now thinking about it. My oldest is in college now, so this was a while ago. But what is your outlook on what his sort of diet is like currently, what it may be like in the future? Like, how is it to be in a household with children now? And then I don't know if your husband is pretty much keto like yourself, but just what does that look like in a family, and especially with kids? What does that sort of keto lifestyle look like?
So my husband is not keto. He's low carb, but only
Okay.
because he cannot fend for himself in the kitchen. So he's reduced to just eating whatever I make and proteins, and I make a carb side for him. So, I usually will make him like mashed potatoes or something like that, or rice, whatever it is to go with, the main protein that we're having. And he has a totally different metabolism from me. So if he goes keto, he will become emaciated. His dad is the same. Like the way they're built, he's very lean already. So if he doesn't eat carbs, he just gets like unhealthily thin. So problem that unhealthy, but just the fact that he can't eat enough in a day. I'm always trying to get him to eat more. um yeah, so he does low carb basically just because we don't have enough carbs in the house for him to eat high carb. And so our son is, it's really interesting with him. So the younger you are, obviously, the more mitochondria you have, and you have this brown fat when you're first born, and you have all these stem cells, and you're so healthy. You can recover so easily from everything, and your metabolism is off the charts. When you look at charts of what of our metabolism looks like long term, it's extremely high when we're young. We're going through so much growth, the first 20 years especially, and we're so energetic and we're moving all the time. And as you yourself said, the main reason why our metabolic rate goes down later is not because our metabolism or the biochemical reactions are slowing down. It's just we are less active. We become more sedentary. We're sitting at our desk all the time, and we're just not running around all day like they are. And so you can obviously get away with a lot more and still be healthy the younger you are. But with Luca, I do a low carb like approach, and that's just because we're whole foods approach. So I don't like try to restrict him unnecessarily from anything other than processed foods. Like that's really what we try to avoid. So I'm still breastfeeding him, and that's been like his main diet since he was born. And then his first food was liver, and anyone who's followed me for years knows that that's totally typical, because I'm known for making liver pate obsessively. So I gave him, liver pate, and liver was one of his first foods, and he just loves meat. So we're like a meat based as a family. And I make sure that he always has protein with every meal. But when I do give him, like most of the time, he's not like a big snacker. What we do for snacks is I have this freeze dried cheese, which he loves. It's like goat cheese, like in little cubes, and cheddar and all that. And that's, all protein and fat. So it's a great snack. If you're going to have a snack, I think whether, child or adult, it should always, have some protein in it. And so if we do like some, whole foods like carrot sticks or snacks like that, then I'll put some hummus with it. If I even I'll do like a little bit of banana sometimes for him, and it always has some almond butter with it. So there's always a protein or some yogurt. And one thing that we do for fruit is he loves berries. So we do like lots of blueberries, strawberries, like all those high fiber, low glycemic fruits. And I get freeze dried strawberries and blueberries, and it makes the fruit like crunchy. So it's like a snack, but unlike dried fruit, it's not full of sugar, and it's not like a lot more glycemic. It's just, the fruit itself, but I guess they freeze dry it through this like dry ice process. So it just makes it crispy. So our approach is just trying to give him a lot of variety, and expose him to a lot of foods as long as they're just whole foods. And the most processed thing we probably eat is, yogurt.
I
But
was
he's
going to
never
ask you
had
about that.
sugar.
I
Yeah,
ask
he's
if you
never
made your
had
own yogurt.
he's never had sugar. And then on his birthday, his 1 year birthday, I made him a keto birthday cake. And it was like a chocolate and strawberry cake with keto icing. And it was the first time he ever clapped. He had a bite and he started clapping. And all the other kids who were here just went wild, and they were all, clapping with him. But it was the best, validation or whatever you could ever have for staying up late to make a special birthday cake, and he loved it. But he hasn't had sugar yet, obviously no juice, nothing like that. And my belief with fruit is like, as long as it's whole foods form, it still has the fiber in it. It's all the research shows that fruit in general has more pros than cons. But it shouldn't never be a free for all. So like a piece of fruit with a meal is good. And then, just not overdoing it on the fructose, because, the fructose, it can trigger this sort of, like Dr. Rick Johnson's research on the fat switch. It can trigger this switch where, you start like really storing fat, and it's the way that fructose is, metabolized by the liver. So that's why the high fructose corn syrup in the sodas and the fruit juice and all of that, it can just really wreak havoc on your metabolism and your body composition as well.
Yeah, let me just unpack that a little bit. I love what you said. You introduced him to real food through your liver pate. Like, if that's their first exposure, I remember when I was a kid, my mom is amazing. She actually fed us liver, and I hated it. And I think it's because, I was on a low fat diet, because that's just what we did. If 40 plus years ago, is everybody was low fat and we were high carb, and she fed us this, and it was like, ooh, that's kind of weird. And I don't remember how she cooked it exactly, but how amazing that you started with something so nutritionally dense with tons of vitamins, minerals. I mean, liver, guys, is like one of the most nutrient dense things ever. Like, meat in general is great if it's, well sourced and all that, but to actually eat the organ meats, like that's where the money is, right? That's what people fought over in years past. Like, the really important people got the organ meats, and then the scraps were left for everybody else. The muscle meat, which is kind of like what we eat in general. When we think of meat, we think of muscle meat, right? And so how amazing that you started with that, and that the stuff that you have in the house for him to reach for when he gets a little bit, hungry or snacky, it's just real food. I think that's the biggest takeaway there, is if we have these real food items for our kids, that's what they're going to eat. That's what I keep around the house as well. For my kids' snacks, it's either some kind of a cheese, or like for us from Hawaii, we love macadamia nuts, and they're super dense with healthy fat. I mean, they're, people used to cringe when I would eat these things because they're high in saturated fat, but it's from a natural source. It's a good type of fat, but it's so satiating. Like you said at the very beginning, when you eat satiating foods, which are primarily whole foods with protein and fat, you don't even have the need to crave for carbs. And so making that stuff available for your family, wow, this is amazing. The hardest part is like once they get into school and they see like what every other kid's eating, they're like, they're curious naturally.
Yeah, I think we're thinking about the homeschooling, route, but even just at because we do a lot of play groups and play dates with, my mom friends, and, the other babies are eating like the rice crackers and like, processed snacks, and I have no judgment of what they're eating, but, sometimes Luca's like trying to grab so he's like, that looks different. But yeah, I think school might be a little more challenging. And so we're definitely looking into homeschooling maybe as a possible route. I know that you mentioned that you guys did a combination of those kinds of approaches, but once they're in school, it definitely is another level.
Yeah, no, but I think when you start them at home, really with the real, whole foods and not the processed stuff, which has what I call kind of the evil triad, right? The highly processed grains, which are all the gluten and garbage we process, and then the highly processed sugars, and of course the bad fats, all the seed oils. So when you avoid that sort of wicked, evil triad, then it's all uphill from there. Just eat real food. And if you provide that for your kids, we have on the counter at home, like macadamia nuts, almonds, and then we do have some cheese in the fridge. They like all kids kind of like cheese sticks and whatnot, and we make sure it's a higher quality and that sort of thing. And that's all they reach for. Or if we have berries, we love to buy berries because they taste great. The kids love them, and they're not bad for you because it's a whole fruit, right? What I always say is eat your fruit, don't drink it. Like whatever you do, don't drink fruit juice is like the worst thing ever for the fructose that you mentioned that's so highly concentrated that bombards the liver. As a physician, it makes me cringe because right now, and you know this, the most common reason for a liver transplant is now non-alcoholic fatty liver disease caused essentially by overeating high fructose corn syrup or just fructose. And mostly nowadays in the processed foods is the high fructose corn syrup and all the sugary stuff. And it
Uh,
is so saddening. I've seen kids on the transplant list
oh
because
no.
they drink too much soda, and you can't deny it. Like, it's the number one cause of liver transplant now, and it is a travesty, and it's all
And
preventable. So
if it's preventable, it's reversible. Dr. Rick Johnson has studies where that he reversed his colleague's son's fatty liver just by getting
yeah,
him off fructose. And if that education isn't there and they get a transplant, then they're gonna be in the same spot in 5 or 10 years, right?
yeah, they're going to be needing a second one, especially if they're kids that were at that level of requiring a transplant. And how great that you mentioned it's not only you can treat it, but you can reverse it. You literally can reverse it, which is true to literally all these metabolic issues, right? 88% of us are not metabolically healthy in some way or another, but we can change that. And that
Yes.
change can start in a couple of days to weeks. It doesn't take years to change it. I think that's my favorite take home I like to share with people, is it can actually happen pretty quickly.
Yeah, so quickly that you have to be careful sometimes. It's like when you were talking about the liver, it's like it's so nutrient dense that you have to be careful to not overeat it or you'll have
Yeah.
too many nutrients. It's yeah.
Yeah, I think most people are pretty safe with not overeating liver, but
I know, that's why it's self-limiting.
where do you get? Is it mostly beef liver, chicken liver? What are you using mostly?
So I can't do ruminant liver. There's something about the
Mm,
texture that just screams like we shouldn't be eating this. I don't know what it is. I know it's so nutrient dense and it's the one I've had this discussion with so many, people on the podcast. It's like, why do you think it is? Like we should be loving this.
yeah,
But I do poultry liver. So turkey, there's
okay,
a farm that does pasture raised turkey and I get turkey livers from them. I can't always source it from them. Sometimes I get chicken livers. I try to get organic when I can. But I just do that. So I used to really do a lot of pate before I had a kid. And now, we're more efficient in the kitchen. So I will just pan fry it in some butter and put some onion and garlic salt or powder and sometimes a little bit of truffle salt, and it's delicious. Like I'll just have it. Usually I do it on the weekends, like if we're having a nice breakfast. It really goes well with like eggs and bacon and all that. And Luca and Pete and we all just have like a tablespoon or so worth, sometimes more. And you'll notice yourself if you get really in tune with intuitive eating and you get off all the processed foods and your palate sort of resets, that you notice that you will crave it more at times when you need all these minerals. And these minerals that you can get, and nutrients from liver are just amazing. As you were saying, like zinc, it's so rich in zinc and in, vitamin A, it's off the charts. And it just provides so many nutrients. It's a superfood. Like we shouldn't be calling, spinach and acai berry superfoods. It should be liver. But it's a really easy way to do it. It's just pan fry it in some butter and it's really delicious. And I think it's kind of sad that culturally, especially in the West, we've gotten so far removed from that, because here in Czech, liver is still a delicacy. If you go to most Czech restaurants, like any Czech restaurant, it'll be on the menu. It's usually an appetizer. So they'll either have, just liver that they make in the restaurant, like house made, or they'll have it as a part of an entree. And it's people know and understand. And when all the, lockdowns happen and I would go to the grocery store, I would see all of these, like they call them bubbas, like grandmothers buying liver. Like they knew, like, shit was going down. Gotta go get the liver because that's gonna make me healthy. And I don't know why we've like lost that information because for like the average person, if you talk to them about eating liver, they're like, that's for the dogs, or in some supermarkets, you can literally only find it in the pet food section. And it's like you said, it's a travesty. And I wish that, we had more of an appreciation for it, because it just could make people so healthy. It's a multivitamin. It's amazing. And your biggest risk with it is like overdoing it.
Which, yeah, most of us, at least in the West, we're certainly not at risk for. I love how the grandmother or the lady that was in the store was stocking up on liver when everybody in the grocery stores I frequent was stocking up on everything in the middle, which is all the processed garbage. And the outskirts, which is the fresh food, was always plentiful.
Yeah.
Like, she had it right. She was taking a page out of the same books that were, she was totally tuned into it. That's amazing. I want to just quickly talk about maybe some of the pitfalls or places that people struggle a little bit when they're starting with keto. I know we're getting close to time, so I just want to address a couple of the common issues that come up when people are starting keto. We already talked about the keto flu, so we don't need to talk about that. But when people are first kind of starting this, we mentioned starting slow is important. What do you feel like is the most helpful thing with respect to? I feel like environment is really, really helpful. And, if you don't have a supportive family or people that you spend a lot of time with, that's challenging. How do you work with people with that sort of objection, I guess, or that challenge where they just, they struggle because the people around them think they're totally wacko, and it's like, oh my gosh, you're starting this Atkins diet. No, guys, this is not the pork rinds that Atkins talked about. Like, this is real food. So how do you address that with the people you work with and whatnot?
Yeah, you bring up such an important point. And one of the reasons that I think people now with keto and low carb do so well is because we have such a vibrant online community. And so people have a community. They feel like if you join, Instagram or Facebook groups, you connect with other people who are in this space, and there's so much support out there, like free support available for people. And I think that makes a big difference. One of the other big factors is making an identity shift, like changing your identity and changing sort of how you think of yourself in terms of, I am like a high carb plant-based person. Shifting your mentality to, I am someone who eats like low carb whole foods. That has a big effect on people's, sustaining the diet. But I think ultimately you have to find something that is sustainable for you. And, for myself, I didn't love eating like high fat. Like, I think that that's something that sometimes people think that keto is just high fat all the time. And it's kind of a turnoff for people who don't really like eating that way. And it's not something that you can sustain for a long time. So people will like do it, and then they're like, I'm on, fell off the wagon again, or they'll try and they won't be able to keep at it easily. And it really, whichever lifestyle you choose, I think it should be something that you are like, I could see myself eating this way for a long time. And so, for me, I found that this modified keto with moderate protein, it's more of a Mediterranean style diet. And that I find for a lot of people is something more sustainable, because, you're just eating a lot of like healthy sort of, steak, chicken, fish, pork, like lots of healthy proteins that you just throw on the grill. You grilled lots of grilled vegetables with like olive oil, lots of you can do a lot of salads with nice dressings, and then the low glycemic fruit. And, yogurt is, lower sort of, not the super high fat, but like mid to lower fat if your goal is fat loss, as a part of that as well. But, cheeses, like these kinds of things, I think the Mediterranean sort of low glycemic approach is much more literally approachable for a lot of people. So I just don't want people to think that there's only one way, and it's sort of this like mayonnaise, cheese, bacon diet, which is like really gross, to think about. And I think that sometimes that's how people think of keto. And, if you think of it as more of this, like, whole foods, like delicious variety, lots of fresh, green vegetables, lots of, variety in, when it comes to vegetables, and some low glycemic fruit, and then the healthy proteins, and, some healthy dairy. Like that is something that a lot of people will find, more accessible and more inviting and something that they can see themselves sustaining. And it's like, if you go to Italy, like a lot of people think of Italy as like pizza and pasta. But we go to Italy a lot because it's only a couple hours away. And to Greece, we're going there actually this Saturday, and it's a Mediterranean style, and it's the exact same way that we eat here. So if you think of it as like Greek food, Greek salads, it's such flavorful food. And most of the people there, they're eating, they're not eating pizza and pasta every night. We found that people are eating like steak with a salad, or, fish with a salad, or like these kinds of healthy, that's the Mediterranean lifestyle, where they have, some of the most centenarians in the world. So I think that's just something I want to point out, is like, there's more to it. It can be a little bit more like flexible and interesting as a diet than it can come across sometimes, just on the internet, or if you're on the wrong website, or you're reading the wrong post or something.
You nailed it. I mean, the Europeans, the Mediterranean style of eating is, I tell people, have you ever been? And we talk about it. And if not, we talk about the types they eat, that they really only use the extra virgin, highly, this quality olive oil. They don't use the seed oils that we use. And so I think it's such a rich, tasty, like my wife and I's favorite place to go to in Europe, you named it, is Italy, because their food is incredible. I mean, it's just so amazing, and it's satisfying, and it's just, oh my gosh, it's so tasty. So I always try to use that approach, like what you can add to your diet, not so much what you're taking away. The takeaway is three things, right? The evil triad. We talked about that: highly processed grains and flours, sugars, and the seed oils. Like, you take those three things away, and you just add, numerous real food, healthy, choices like the Mediterranean food that you mentioned. It's making my mouth water thinking about how amazing the food is, especially in Italy. That's a place I know. My wife and I went to Portugal recently. It was the same. Like, everything was olive oil. We ate, the olives that they had locally. And it was like, oh my gosh, my taste buds had never like sampled such a rich, fruit. Olives are fruit, as most of us may know, but it was so dang tasty, and it was just the real food they had locally. It was incredible. So what does that look like in your home? Spain, yeah. So what does it look like in Vanessa's home when she does her first meal of the day? Like, what does that look like? Like, just give me a rundown, maybe what you traditionally would eat in a given day. Like, what does that look like?
Sure. So this is everyone's favorite question. Like, every time I do a podcast, I'm like, just tell me what you eat, and we can basically call it a day, because that's all everyone really wants to know. But what I do in terms of like a daily intermittent fasting routine is, I do a 16-8 every day fasted, and then an 8-hour eating window. And for me, that's like a very sustainable way of doing some intermittent fasting every day. And what's great is your body starts making ketones after about 12 hours fasted. So when you wake up in the morning, if you're a great way to start, this whole like metabolic flexibility approach is just adding some intermittent fasting. And, the more you do lower and lower carb, and the more you start to fast, you'll find the fasting gets easier in the low carb, because you're becoming more and more fat adapted. So you start pushing back your breakfast by an hour, 2 or 3 in the morning. And that's basically what I do. So I have my first meal of the day usually around 12, and my husband does the same. And we usually give Luca some food in the morning, so he has got breakfast as well. But we usually have our first like big meal of the day. It's usually the biggest meal of the day, and that's like a big lunch. And for me, it's a very like high protein, sort of moderated fat, depending on like how much energy I need, pretty carnivore style. And seasonally, in the summer, I have more carbs, more salads, more vegetables. In the fall and winter, I do more of like a carnivore approach, and just a lot less carbohydrate intake. And I usually have dinner we usually eat around 5:30, 6 at the latest. And then I usually close my eating window after dinner. So I've been doing this like 2 meal a day approach for a long time. And some of the rules I have around that, I have to get around 100 grams of protein a day. So that's very important for me, and very important for muscle protein synthesis, is getting adequate protein to prevent excessive muscle protein breakdown. And also I do strength training 4 to 5 times a week. So I need to get enough protein to help build that muscle. And that's, for most women, a really good recommendation. And it's also important to achieve nitrogen balance if you're doing any kind of restriction as well. So getting at least 100 grams of protein a day. I'm not really worried about people going over, because most people just struggle to get enough protein. And then in there, making sure that I'm getting adequate energy calories, like from fat and carbohydrate, to make sure that I'm, getting enough energy to sustain myself. And I can gauge that usually by my energy and my hunger levels. So, I don't really like track so much. I've been doing this for a long time. So I will tend to just go by my hunger during the week. And I've noticed that my body will course correct naturally. So if I'm not so hungry one day, and then I'll make up for it the next day by being extra hungry, and then it kind of averages out throughout the week. So, yeah, does that answer the question?
Yeah. No, I love how you really clued into the importance of protein. I think you're right on with that target. 100 grams is really kind of a baseline for a normal active person. And if you're a guy, you should shoot for higher than that. My personal goal is 150, which I usually make, not always, but usually. And I'm usually a 2-meal-a-day guy as well. I rarely snack. When I do, I've already mentioned what my favorite snacks are. Macadamia nuts are like my go-to. If you ever snack, what is your sort of go-to snack?
Lately, it's been this like freeze-dried cheese that because I just always have it around for Luca, like on walks and stuff. And that's really the only thing. The only other thing that I'll have as a snack is yogurt. I have like I do like a higher protein, so it just means it's like a lower fat yogurt, and I change it up depending on my goals. So if I'm in like more maintenance, it's like more like 5% fat. And then if I'm like in a cutting phase, it's like 0 to 2% fat. It's usually like 1 or 2% fat. So like I'll cut back on the fat and take a little bit if I'm like wanting to lose some weight or something. But those are my main snacks, is like dairy, but high protein dairy. So dairy gets like such a bad rap when it comes to fat loss. And it's, I think, because people don't realize like you can have, all dairy doesn't have to be high fat. Like you can have high protein dairy, and there's more and more of those products all the time. So like when you go to the stores, you're seeing more of this like high protein, cheese, and it just is like a lower fat. So it's like 10 grams of fat per, serving, or 100 grams serving, instead of being like 30 grams. And that makes it, in my opinion, a health food, because you're getting like tons of calcium, which is so important it's such an important mineral for our bone health and so many other, biochemical functions. But you're also getting a ton of protein, and the carb content is relatively minimal.
Yeah, because it's so high protein. I mean, the like Greek yogurts and the cottage cheese and things like that.
Yes.
I tried making my own yogurt for a while, and I thought it was kind of cool, because as you probably know, most yogurts are really only allowed to ferment for a few hours, and that's why they don't have a ton of probiotic sort of richness. And I was fermenting mine for around 48 hours, which is like 12 times the norm for most stuff you get in the store. I just kind of copied Dr. Davis, William Davis, you've probably heard of him, that did the Super Gut book, and he has a bunch of recipes, and Lactobacillus reuteri is kind of this new kid on the block that's amazing. So I was making this yogurt, and I thought it was kind of cool and kind of fun, but it is a little bit, it's a little bit of a to-do, right? Like my kids also, they didn't really like it that much. They like this regular Greek yogurt, and there's so many, I love that you mentioned nowadays, there's so many more options than there used to be. Like when my kids were young, it was like Yoplait, which is like super high carb, super sugary, like total garbage yogurt. And now there's like just a sundry of great high quality Greek yogurts. And if any of them are sweetened, I go for just like the stevia or the, something that's not carrying artificial stuff like aspartame or Splenda, sucralose, all these kinds of things. And there's just more options, which is great. And so Makes it a
Have you
little bit
seen the
easier.
skier? There's one now that it's been in Europe for a while, but I think there's more and more of it now in North America. And it's the Icelandic yogurt called
Yeah,
Skyr.
I have seen
And
that
that
one, the
one's
Icelandic one. Yeah.
it's great because it's they make it with Renee, which is how they make goat cheese. And so it has this like really tangy taste. But if you get it plain, and you add a little bit of stevia to it or whichever sweetener,
Yeah.
it's absolutely delicious, and it's a super high protein food. And that's, you know, dairy and yogurt have some of the highest leucine
Mhm.
content, which really, really helps with muscle growth and muscle maintenance.
Yeah, no, what a great. I'm gonna look. I've seen it in a couple of places. A lot of the supermarkets don't have it, but it's definitely starting to become more available, which is awesome. And there's one other thing I wanted to ask you with just the whole just keto lifestyle. And if I know for me, when I was first kind of starting it, my wife was complaining a little bit because my breath was a little bit different than she remembered. Maybe my body smelled a little bit different. Do you ever get those complaints? And what's your usual kind of go-to advice on that?
Oh man, my husband is so I don't know what the word is, like careful around what he tells me. So, that may have happened, but I would never know because yeah, he's just he would never like point something out like that, but I totally would about him. So I can see why she did. But so I think a few years ago there was this really like interesting internet phenomenon that started where there were all these articles that were actually put out deliberately by a PR company to convince people that if they were eating keto that they would have these like sort of different body scents and things, and that would make them like self-conscious. And it was really upsetting because I heard from a lot of
Oh,
women who were like, what if my coworkers, are talking behind my back and saying like she smells different or something? And when you go into a fat adapted or keto adapted state and your body is making ketones, there is, we talked a little bit about those three forms, but there's, beta hydroxybutyrate and acetoacetate, and those are fuels. And a byproduct of burning those fuels or using those fuels more for energy is you'll have more acetone on your breath. And I love acetone because I created the tone device, which you
yeah.
can measure your breath ketones on, and it's feedback. And so some people will say like they taste a little bit metallic sort of taste in their mouth. Other people can like they can feel the acetone on their breath, and then it's also expelled in the urine at first. So to me, like all that feedback was always like really exciting. Like I'm getting back into ketosis. So I never really paid too much attention to it. And most people say that, it does sort of dissipate after a while because your body, when it first starts making ketones, it's kind of a new thing because most people don't really go into ketosis much except for like overnight fast. And so the body tissues are not adapted yet to using ketones, or those tissues are not used to taking it up as much. But after a few weeks of when we call this keto adaptation, our cells start to really take up the ketones, and so we expel less of it. And so I do think that that's probably responsible for people saying, well, they notice it goes away after a while. Um, but I always love it. For me, it's like, great feedback that, what I'm doing is working. And I really think the most important thing is like your overall health. And, I think I never really was too concerned with those kinds of things because the most important thing to me is being healthy. But I do know that for anyone who's experienced it, they've usually said it's a temporary thing. As our tissues start to take it up more, we waste less of the ketones, and so you don't have that as much.
Yeah, I found that as well, and I just don't feel like it's a big deal. And I'm kind of like you; I'm a little bit nerdy and geeky that way. I kind of like it, and the fact that you've developed a way to measure it in the breath without having to prick yourself or do a bunch of urine tests all the time. And I think it's fantastic. And maybe that's a great segue to just give you a chance to let everybody know how they can reach out to you, where they can find you, follow you, how they can get your
Sure.
tone device, all that kind of stuff to wrap it up.
Oh yeah, well, thank you so much for the opportunity. So I have a podcast called the Optimal Protein Podcast, and you can find it on all podcast players. I'm most active on social media on Instagram, and you can find me there at Ketogenic Girl. And I have a book, as you mentioned, Keto Essentials, and the Tone Device. If you're watching this, you can see it behind me on the shelf here. It's a non-invasive ketone measuring device. So you can, just breathe into it and it will tell you how sort of your rate of fat burning because of how high your breath ketones are. And the acetone, as we discussed, is sort of a measurement for, how much fat oxidation or fat burning that you're doing. So you can find that at ketogenicgirl.com. That's my website. And feel free to send me any questions. If you have any questions about it, I'd love to hear from anyone.
Awesome. So amazing. Please, everybody follow Vanessa, Ketogenic Girl. Check out her website, her Tone Device, all great stuff. I've kind of been wanting to try something less invasive. I've used the urine test strips and the pricks, the finger pricks and all that. So that's so awesome that you've got a much nicer, kinder, gentler way to do that. Thanks again for being with us today on the Unshakable Health podcast. It's just been such a gift. I really know our listeners and viewers will have so much value here. So everybody, please follow Vanessa, Ketogenic Girl, and check out her Tone Device.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the podcast. Please make sure you hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss out on any future episode. And I'd love to hear your comments and feedback. If there's any topic you'd love to hear about, you're dying to know, burning questions, please comment below and let me know what future topics are of interest to you.